A flight attendant slammed her hand on the armrest, ripped an 8-year-old black boy out of his seat, and shoved him down the aisle like he was cargo. He hit the armrest of row 12 with his shoulder. His colored pencils exploded across the floor. 200 passengers watched a grown woman in uniform drag a child who was crying, "I didn't do anything wrong," toward the back of the plane. She didn't check his ticket. She didn't ask his name. She looked at his skin and decided he was a problem. What she didn't know was that his father owned the airline, and he was already on the phone. Subscribe right now. Stay until the end. Comment your city. Let me see how far this story flies. David Cole knelt in front of his son at the departure gate and held both of the boy's hands. Ethan was 8, small for his age, wearing a navy polo shirt his father had ironed that morning, and a backpack stuffed with colored pencils and a drawing pad. "You remember what I told you?" Ethan nodded fast. "Be polite. Say please and thank you. Keep my boarding pass right here." He patted his front pocket. David squeezed his hands. "And if somebody gives you a hard time, stay calm, use my words, call you. That's my man." David pulled him close and held him. He held him longer than he planned to, because something in his chest didn't want to let go. First time flying alone. 8 years old, Atlanta to New York to see his grandmother. "Dad, you're squeezing too hard." David laughed and released him. "Sorry, buddy. Go on. Grandma's waiting." A gate attendant, a young woman with a warm smile, took Ethan's hand and walked him down the jetway. David watched until the boy disappeared around the corner. He stood there for another 30 seconds, staring at the empty hallway, and then he turned and walked away. He didn't know that was the last peaceful moment he'd have for a very long time. Ethan found his seat, 4A, window, first class. He buckled in, pulled out his drawing pad, and started sketching an airplane. He always drew airplanes, had since he was 3, when his father lifted him onto his shoulders at an air show so he could watch the jets scream across the sky. That was the day Ethan decided he was going to be a pilot. The cabin filled around him, business travelers, a woman rocking a baby, an elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle. Ethan didn't notice any of them. He was shading the wings of his airplane in sky blue, tongue poking out the side of his mouth, the way kids do when they're concentrating hard. A young flight attendant named Sheila brought him orange juice. "Here you go, sweetheart. You need anything? You press that button right there, okay?" "Thank you, ma'am," Ethan said. Sheila smiled at him and moved on. The door closed, the engine spooled up, the plane pushed back. 20 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign went off. The cabin settled into that low, steady hum. Laptops opened, eyes closed, everything routine. Then Linda Parker walked up the aisle. 22 years on the job, senior cabin crew. She moved through the aircraft the way she always did, shoulders back, chin up, scanning every row like she was running inventory. Her colleagues had a word for it behind her back. They called it the sweep. Linda sweeping the cabin, looking for problems. And when Linda looked for problems, she always found them. She stopped at row 4. She looked down at Ethan. The boy didn't see her at first. He was still drawing. "Excuse me." Her voice cut clean through the cabin noise. "I need to see your boarding pass." Ethan looked up. "Yes, ma'am." He reached into his front pocket and handed it over, just like his dad taught him. Linda studied the pass. She studied Ethan. She studied the pass again. Something crossed her face. Not confusion. Something else. Something colder. "This doesn't look right," she said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this seat is for premium passengers. Are you sure you're supposed to be up here?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "My dad bought the ticket. That's my seat. 4A. It says right there." Linda folded the boarding pass and held it at her side. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a mix-up. Why don't you come with me? We have some seats in the back that might be more appropriate." More appropriate. She said those words like she'd rehearsed them. "But that's my seat," Ethan said. His voice got smaller. "I'm going to need you to move. We have passengers who actually paid for these seats." Who actually paid. Like his father hadn't. Like the ticket was fake. Like an 8-year-old boy had somehow conned his way into first class. Ethan didn't move. Not out of defiance. Out of fear. His legs wouldn't work. His hands gripped the armrests, and his eyes started burning, and his father's voice played in his head on a loop. Stay calm. Use your words. Stay calm. My dad bought this ticket, he said. His voice cracked on the word dad. Please, I'm supposed to be here. Linda grabbed his arm, not gently, not like you'd guide a child. She gripped him above the elbow and pulled him out of the seat. His colored pencils went flying across the tray table. His drawing pad hit the floor. The orange juice tipped over and spilled down the armrest in a sticky stream. Ethan stumbled into the aisle, his backpack dragged behind him, half unzipped. Don't make this difficult, Linda said. She was already walking, pulling him along like luggage. I didn't do anything wrong, Ethan whispered. So quiet, so small. The voice of a child trying to be brave while the world was telling him he had no right to be where he was. She marched him past row after row, past the man who lowered his glasses and stared, past the woman who pressed her hand over her mouth, past the teenage girl who lifted her phone and hit record, past every single person who saw what was happening and said nothing. Row 26, middle seat, between two strangers. Sit here, Linda said, and don't get up until we land. She turned and walked away. Ethan sat down. He pulled his backpack onto his lap and hugged it against his chest. His chin shook. One tear spilled down his left cheek, and he wiped it away hard with the back of his hand, the way his father did when he thought nobody was watching. The man next to him, big guy, baseball cap, looked at the boy and then looked at the flight attendant's back disappearing up the aisle. Hey, little man, you okay? Ethan nodded, but he wasn't. He was 8 years old, 30,000 feet in the air, surrounded by strangers, and a woman in uniform had just told him he didn't belong. 4 rows ahead, Marcus Hill had watched every second of it. Marcus was 44, former Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan. He was built like a man who could break things, but had spent his whole life learning not to. He was quiet by nature, careful, observant, and what he had just witnessed lit a fire in his chest that he hadn't felt since combat. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up slowly. He walked to row 26 and crouched down next to Ethan. Hey, buddy, my name's Marcus. You mind if I take a look at your boarding pass? Ethan pulled it from his pocket with trembling fingers and handed it over. Marcus read it. 4A, first class. The boy's full name, the correct flight number, everything in perfect order. He folded the pass carefully and handed it back. You hang on to that. Don't let anybody take it from you again. Then he stood and walked toward the front galley, each step heavy, each step deliberate. Linda was pouring herself a cup of coffee, calm as Sunday morning. Ma'am, Marcus stopped 3 feet from her. That boy you just moved, did you look at his boarding pass? Linda didn't turn around. Sir, I handled it. Return to your seat. I didn't ask if you handled it. I asked if you read his boarding pass. She turned now. I assessed the situation and made a judgment call. I've been doing this for 22 years. Then you should know what seat 4A looks like on a boarding pass, because I just read it. He's exactly where he's supposed to be. Linda set the coffee pot down. Sir, I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated by a passenger. And that kid shouldn't have been dragged out of a seat he paid for. But here we are. The cabin was dead silent now. Not the comfortable quiet of a cruising altitude. The dangerous quiet. The kind where everyone is holding their breath. A woman in row 8 stood up, mid-50s, business suit, voice like a judge. I saw the whole thing. He showed you his pass, and you ignored it. A man in row 12 leaned into the aisle. She grabbed his arm. I watched her do it. He's a child. Then another voice from row 15, what is wrong with you? And another from row 19, put that boy back in his seat. The cabin cracked open, voice after voice, passenger after passenger. 200 people who had been silent were suddenly not silent anymore, and Linda Parker stood at the center of it like a woman watching the floor give way beneath her. This is a safety matter, she said. Louder now, almost shouting. I will not be questioned about crew decisions by passengers. Marcus took one step closer. He dropped his voice so low only she could hear. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I know what a real threat looks like. That boy is not a threat, but what you just did to him, that's going to follow you forever. Sheila, the young flight attendant, stepped out from behind the galley curtain. She was shaking, but she spoke. Linda, I checked the manifest before boarding. That child is a confirmed unaccompanied minor assigned to seat 4A. His ticket was purchased through our premium loyalty program. He's flagged in the system for special attention. Silence. Linda stared at her. I don't remember asking you. You didn't, Sheila said, but somebody had to say it. A man in row 6 started clapping, then the woman in row 8, then 10 more people, then 20. The applause rolled through the cabin like thunder, raw and unpolished, the sound of people who had been watching something ugly and were relieved someone finally called it what it was. Marcus walked back to Ethan. He held out his hand. Come on, buddy, we're going back to your seat. Ethan looked up at him, those big brown eyes, still wet. Am I in trouble? Marcus felt something break inside him, something he thought Afghanistan had already broken. He crouched down. No, son, you were never in trouble, not for 1 second. You did everything right. You hear me? Everything. He walked Ethan back to 4A. He picked up the drawing pad. He gathered every colored pencil one by one. He wiped down the armrest with a napkin. He set the boy's backpack under the seat. Sheila, Marcus called, can we get this young man a fresh orange juice? Coming right up, she said, and her voice cracked when she said it. Ethan sat down. He looked out the window for a long time. The clouds were so white they hurt to look at. Then he picked up his red pencil and went back to coloring the tail of his airplane. But the damage was done. You can put a child back in his seat. You can hand him his pencils and bring him juice and tell him he did nothing wrong. But you can't unteach him what he just learned. You can't undo the moment an adult in authority told him he didn't belong. That sinks in. That stays. That stains something deep inside a child's understanding of the world, and it never fully washes out. 3 rows behind first class, a 17-year-old girl named Kayla Mitchell was staring at her phone. She had recorded the entire thing. 14 minutes and 37 seconds. Every frame. The grab, the stumble, the scattered pencils, the whispered words. Marcus stepping in. Sheila speaking up. The applause. She played it back, then she played it again. Her mother sat beside her, hand pressed to her chest. Post it, her mother said. Kayla typed a caption. Flight attendant just dragged an 8-year-old black boy out of his first-class seat for absolutely no reason. He had his boarding pass. He did nothing wrong. The whole plane saw it. Watch this. She hit post at 10:47 a.m. Eastern. 15 minutes, 10,000 views. 45 minutes, 500,000. 1 hour. The video crossed 2 million and it was climbing so fast the platform couldn't keep the counter updated. Hashtags exploded. News desks scrambled. Civil rights attorneys started making phone calls. The airline social media accounts were drowning under a tidal wave of rage. And nobody, not a single person in that firestorm, knew who Ethan's father was. Not yet. Not even close. In Chicago, on the 42nd floor of a lakefront high-rise, David Cole was reviewing quarterly earnings for his third company of the morning. Black coffee at his right hand, a framed photo of Ethan at his left. The photograph showed the boy at age 5 sitting on David's shoulders at that same air show, mouth wide open, pointing at the sky. David Cole was not famous. He was not on magazine covers. He did not attend galas or give keynote speeches or post on social media. He was the kind of wealthy that lived in shareholder filings and offshore holding structures. Quiet money. Patient money. The kind of money that didn't talk, but moved entire industries when it decided to act. He owned 48% of Orion Holdings Group. Orion controlled 17 subsidiary companies, airlines, logistics, aviation manufacturing, and among those subsidiaries, one specific airline that operated a specific morning flight from Atlanta to New York. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, Janet. A link and 2 words. Watch this. David opened the video. He pressed play. For the first 10 seconds, his face showed nothing. A man used to absorbing information. processing, calculating. Then he saw his son's arm being grabbed. He saw the colored pencils fly. He saw Ethan stumble into the aisle with his backpack dragging behind him. He heard his boy whisper those 5 words, "I didn't do anything wrong." David set the phone face down on the desk. He closed his eyes. He placed both palms flat on the surface and pressed down until his knuckles went white. He stayed like that for a long time. 10 seconds. 20. 30. When he opened his eyes, they were dry. His breathing was even. His jaw was set in a way that anyone who knew him would have recognized and feared. David Cole did not explode. David Cole did not shout or throw things or fire off a tweet. That was never his way. His mother used to say David was like deep water, still on top, crushing pressure underneath. He picked up the phone and called his mother in New York. "Mom, I need you at the gate when Ethan's flight lands. Hold him. Don't let go of him. I'll be there tonight." "David, baby, what happened?" "Something happened on the plane. He's okay. He's safe. But I need you there." "I'll be there. David, talk to me." "Tonight, Mom. I'll tell you everything tonight." He hung up. He sat still for 5 seconds. Then he called Raymond Holt, Chief Legal Counsel of Orion Holdings. "Raymond, emergency board session, Dallas headquarters, tonight." "David, what's going on? You seen the video that's going viral right now? The one with the kid on the plane?" "My assistant just sent it to me. Jesus, that's awful. What does that have to do with—" "That's my son, Raymond." Dead silence on the other end. "That's Ethan. That's my boy, on our airline, being dragged out of his seat by our employee, and 12 million people have watched it happen." Raymond's voice came back thin and shaken. "I'll have the boardroom ready by 7. David hung up. He stood. He walked to his closet and pulled out a charcoal suit. He packed a single bag, 1 shirt, 1 tie, the framed photograph of Ethan from his desk. He moved through his apartment with terrifying efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Every action precise, controlled, deliberate. This was not a man preparing for a meeting. This was a man preparing to dismantle something. At the front door, he paused. He looked back at the empty apartment. At the kitchen table where Ethan ate cereal every morning. At the couch where they watched movies on Friday nights. At the small scratch on the hallway wall where Ethan had crashed his toy airplane when he was 4. David closed his eyes one more time. "I didn't do anything wrong, Dad." He opened the door. He stepped into the elevator. He pressed the button for the parking garage. By tonight, the people who ran that airline would know exactly who they had crossed. Not because David Cole wanted revenge. He didn't. He wanted something far more dangerous. He wanted change. And he had the power to get it. 30,000 feet above the earth, the plane carrying Ethan Cole began its descent into New York. The boy pressed his face against the window and watched the city rise up from below. Bridges like toy models, buildings catching the sun, the river winding silver between the boroughs. He picked up his drawing pad and looked at the airplane he'd been working on all morning. Big wings, red tail, and underneath in careful block letters, 1 word, home. He didn't know that 22 million people had seen his face. He didn't know his name was on every newscast in the country. He didn't know that his father was already on a plane to Dallas with a quiet fury that would tear open a corporation from the inside out. All Ethan knew was that a woman had told him he didn't belong, and a man named Marcus had told him he did. And somewhere deep in his 8-year-old chest, those 2 truths were at war with each other, and the boy was too young to know which one would win. The landing gear dropped. The cabin shuddered. New York rushed up to meet them. And nobody on that flight, not the passengers, not the crew, not Linda Parker hiding in the back galley gripping the counter with both hands, had any idea what was about to happen on the ground. The wheels hit the runway at 12:31 p.m. Eastern. Hard landing. The cabin jolted and Ethan grabbed his armrest with both hands. The passengers started moving before the seatbelt sign even turned off, the way they always do, standing, reaching for overhead bins, pulling out phones. But this flight was different. Nobody was checking emails. Nobody was texting family. Every single person who powered on their phone was met with the same thing: notifications, dozens of them. The video had crossed 30 million views. 30 million in under 2 hours. Marcus Hill turned on his phone and watched the numbers climb in real time. He looked down the aisle at Ethan, who was carefully putting his colored pencils back into his backpack one by one, and something twisted in his gut. That boy had no idea that his face was everywhere, that strangers were crying over him, that his name was a hashtag. The jet bridge connected. The cabin door opened. Passengers filed out, but nobody rushed. Something unspoken moved through that plane. People slowed down as they passed row 4. Some looked at Ethan. A few nodded at him. One woman, mid-60s, gray hair pulled back, stopped and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You're a brave young man," she said. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you different." Ethan looked up at her and said, "Thank you, ma'am." She pressed her lips together hard and walked away fast because she was about to lose it, and she didn't want to do that in front of the child. Marcus waited. He stood in the aisle until Ethan gathered his things, and then he walked behind him up the jet bridge, a silent escort, watching the boy's small shoulders, making sure nobody touched him. Nobody spoke to him wrong. At the gate, he saw an elderly black woman standing just past the threshold, hands clasped, eyes scanning every face that came through. The second she saw Ethan, she dropped to her knees. "Baby!" She pulled him into her arms so fast his backpack swung sideways. "Oh, my baby, come here, come here." Ethan buried his face in her neck and didn't say a word. He just held on. His whole body shook, not from crying, but from the release. That thing children do when they've been holding it together and they finally reach the one person they don't have to be strong for. Gloria Cole held her grandson on the airport floor and rocked him. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't care about the cameras that were already turning toward them because someone had tipped off a local news crew. She held that boy like the world was trying to take him, and she was the last wall standing. Marcus approached slowly. "Ma'am, are you his grandmother?" Gloria looked up. Her eyes were wet but sharp. "I am. Who are you?" "My name is Marcus Hill. I was on the flight. I saw what happened. I walked him back to his seat." Gloria studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached out and grabbed his hand with both of hers. "God sent you on that plane. You hear me? God put you in that seat." Marcus felt his throat close. He squeezed her hand and nodded. "He's a good kid. He did everything right." "I know he did." Gloria stood up, Ethan's hand locked in hers. She looked Marcus dead in the eye. His father is on his way, and Lord help the people who did this. Marcus believed her. At that exact moment, 1:15 p.m. Eastern, David Cole was 37,000 feet in the air on a private charter heading to Dallas. He sat alone in the cabin. No assistants, no lawyers, just David and his phone and the photograph of Ethan he'd taken from his desk. The video had hit 45 million views. CNN was running it on a loop. MSNBC had a panel discussing it. Fox was debating whether it was a race issue or a policy issue. Twitter had split into two camps, those defending the flight attendant and those calling for her arrest. The airline stock had already dropped 4% in after-hours trading, and the market hadn't even fully reacted yet. David scrolled through, none of it. He'd watched the video once. That was enough. He didn't need to see it again. He didn't need the internet to tell him what happened to his son. He knew. He felt it in his bones the way a father feels it, that primal signal that says your child was hurt and you weren't there. His phone rang. Raymond Holt. "David, the board is assembling. I've confirmed 8 of the 12 directors. The other 4 are calling in remotely." "Who's pushing back?" "Henderson and Clark. They're calling it an overreaction." Henderson specifically said, and I quote, "This is a customer service issue, not a board-level issue." David was quiet for 3 seconds. "Henderson has 200,000 shares vested next quarter. Remind him what happens to those shares if I freeze the compensation structure." Raymond paused. "You want me to say that to him directly?" "I want him in that room, Raymond, however you make that happen." "He'll be there." David hung up and looked out the window. Nothing but sky. Flat, endless, indifferent sky. He thought about Ethan's voice on the phone that morning. "Dad, you're squeezing too hard." He thought about the colored pencils scattered across the tray table in the video. He thought about his boy being grabbed by the arm, and something inside him went very still, the way the air goes still before a storm rips through. The plane landed at Dallas-Fort Worth at 4:47 p.m. Central. A black SUV was waiting on the tarmac. David climbed in without a word. The driver knew the destination, 22 minutes to Orion Holdings headquarters. David used every one of those minutes. He called Janet, his assistant. "I need the complete employment file for Linda Parker. Hire date, performance reviews, complaints, everything. On my phone before I walk into that building." "Already working on it. David, there's something you should know. 3 other complaints were filed against her in the last 4 years. 2 involve passengers of color. Both were dismissed internally." David closed his eyes. Dismissed by who? Regional Operations Director, a man named Greg Sullivan. Is Sullivan connected to anyone on the board? He's Henderson's brother-in-law. There it was, the thread. Pull it and the whole thing unravels. "Get me Sullivan's file too," David said. "And Janet. Nobody at headquarters knows I'm coming. Keep it that way." At 5:09 p.m. Central, back in New York, Gloria Cole sat in her living room with Ethan on the couch beside her. He was eating a grilled cheese sandwich and watching cartoons, but he wasn't watching. His eyes were on the screen, but his mind was somewhere else. Gloria could see it, that faraway look. The look of a child replaying something over and over, trying to understand it, trying to find the part where it was his fault. "Ethan, baby, look at me." He turned. "What that woman did to you was wrong. You hear me? It was wrong. It wasn't because of anything you did. It wasn't because of your seat or your ticket or your backpack or anything. She was wrong. Say it back to me." "She was wrong," Ethan said, but his voice was flat, like he was saying the words without believing them. Gloria pulled him close. "Your daddy is handling it, okay? Your daddy is handling everything." "Is he mad?" Gloria thought about her son, about the quiet fury she'd heard in his voice on the phone, about the man she'd raised who never shouted but could silence a room just by walking into it. "Yes, baby, he's mad, but not at you, never at you." Ethan leaned into her side. "Grandma, why did she move me?" Gloria's heart broke clean in half. She took a breath. "Because some people look at you and make up their mind before they even know your name. And that's their sickness, baby, not yours. Never yours." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Marcus told me I did everything right." Marcus is a smart man. "He picked up all my pencils." "Then he's a good man, too." Ethan nodded slowly. He took another bite of his sandwich and turned back to the cartoon. But Gloria saw his free hand reach over and grip the edge of her sleeve, holding on, the way a child does when the world has gotten too big and the only thing that makes sense is the person sitting next to them. At 5:32 p.m. Central, the SUV pulled up to Orion Holdings headquarters, a glass and steel tower in the business district of Dallas. David stepped out, charcoal suit. No briefcase. He carried nothing but his phone. He walked through the lobby. Security recognized him immediately. The senior guard stood up so fast, his chair rolled into the wall. "Mr. Cole, sir, we weren't expecting—" "I know you weren't." David walked past him and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped inside, hit 44. The elevator rose in silence. At 44, the doors opened onto the executive floor. Long corridor. Thick carpet, the hum of money being managed. David walked straight to the main boardroom. Through the glass walls, he could see them. 8 men and 2 women seated around a curved mahogany table. 2 screens on the wall showing the faces of the 4 remote directors. Raymond Holt stood at the head of the table, mid-sentence, when he saw David through the glass. He stopped talking. Every head turned. David opened the door. He didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He walked in and stood at the far end of the table, opposite the CEO, a man named Richard Adler, who was 61 years old and had run the airline division for 9 years. "David," Richard stood up, buttoned his jacket. We were just discussing the situation. I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. We've already opened an internal review and— Sit down, Richard. The room went cold. Richard Adler stared at David for a beat, then sat. David placed his phone on the table. He tapped the screen. The video appeared on both wall monitors. Full screen, high definition. Every head turned to watch. The room heard Linda Parker say, "This doesn't look right." They heard her say, "Passengers who actually paid for these seats." They watched her grab Ethan's arm. They watched the colored pencils scatter. They watched an 8-year-old boy stumble into the aisle and whisper 5 words that were now burned into the memory of 50 million people. "I didn't do anything wrong." David let the video play to the end. Marcus walking Ethan back. Sheila speaking up. The applause. Then, silence. David looked around the table, face by face, director by director. He stopped on Henderson, a florid man with a silver watch who was studying the table like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Who wants to go first?" David said. Nobody spoke. "Fine, I will." David placed both hands on the table. 3 complaints were filed against Linda Parker in the last 4 years, 2 involving passengers of color. Both were dismissed by Greg Sullivan, your regional operations director. Greg Sullivan, who is your brother-in-law, Henderson. Both complaints were buried. No investigation, no follow-up, no consequences. And now my son is on national television being dragged out of a seat that I paid for on an airline that I own. Henderson's face went white. "David, I had no knowledge of—" "I'm not finished." Henderson closed his mouth. "I own 48% of Orion Holdings. I have voting authority over the compensation structure, the expansion budget, and the leadership review process. As of this moment, I am exercising that authority." David paused. He looked at Richard Adler. "Every executive bonus in the airline division is frozen, effective immediately." The room erupted. 3 directors started talking at once. Richard Adler stood up. "David, you can't unilaterally— Read your own bylaws, Richard. Section 12, paragraph 4. A majority stakeholder with a 40% plus position can initiate a freeze on discretionary compensation pending a governance review. I don't need your permission. I don't need a vote. It's already done." Richard sat back down. His face had gone gray. David continued. "Expansion funding for the new Atlanta hub is suspended. All pending route approvals are on hold. And I am formally requesting a full leadership review of the airline division, starting with the regional operations office, starting with Greg Sullivan, and ending wherever the trail leads." Henderson's hand was shaking. "This is retaliation. This is personal." David turned to him slowly. "My 8-year-old son was physically removed from his seat on a commercial aircraft because of the color of his skin, while flying alone, while the crew member responsible had 2 prior complaints buried by your family member. So yes, Henderson, it's personal. And if you have a problem with that, you can tender your resignation tonight." Henderson said nothing. David turned back to the full room. "I'm not here to destroy this airline. I built half of it. My money is in every plane, every terminal, every route you fly. I'm here because a woman in our uniform put her hands on a child, and nobody in this building stopped it. Not after the first complaint, not after the second, not after the third. I'm here because the system I invested in failed, and it failed a boy who trusted it to take care of him." He picked up his phone. The video disappeared from the screens. "You have 48 hours. I want a public statement, not a press release written by lawyers. A real statement, acknowledging what happened, acknowledging the prior complaints, acknowledging the systemic failure. If I don't have it in 48 hours, I will hold a press conference and deliver it myself. And I promise you, my version will be much less flattering." David buttoned his jacket. He looked at Raymond. "Schedule a follow-up for Thursday. Full agenda. I want policy proposals, training mandates, and an independent oversight structure on the table." Raymond nodded. David turned and walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. "One more thing. Some of you are sitting in this room right now thinking about how to spin this, how to minimize it, how to protect yourselves. Let me save you the trouble. He paused. The next time you're tempted to call this a misunderstanding, I want you to picture an 8-year-old boy sitting alone in the back of a plane, hugging his backpack, wondering what he did wrong. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a failure. And it happened on our watch. He walked out. The door closed behind him. 12 directors sat in silence. Richard Adler stared at the blank monitors. Henderson loosened his tie with trembling fingers. The remote directors said nothing, their faces frozen on screen like portraits of men who suddenly understood that the ground beneath them had shifted. Raymond Holt stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them. "You heard him," he said. 48 hours. Nobody argued. In the elevator going down, David Cole stood alone. He pressed his back against the wall and let out one long breath. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of control. From 45 minutes of holding a hurricane behind a wall of calm, he pulled out his phone and called Gloria. "Mom, how is he?" "He's asleep on the couch. He ate 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and fell asleep holding my hand." David's chin dropped to his chest. "Did he say anything?" "He asked me why she moved him." David pressed his palm against his eyes. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that it was her sickness, not his." David couldn't speak for a moment. He breathed. He swallowed. "I'll be there by 10. Keep his door open. I want to see him when I come in." "David." "Yeah, Mom?" "You did good today. Your father would have been proud." David Cole, the man who had just walked into a boardroom of 12 executives and bent every one of them to his will without raising his voice, stood in that elevator and felt his eyes burn. "I'll see you tonight, Mom." He hung up. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Outside the building, news vans were already lining up. Reporters jostled for position. Camera lights flared in the Texas evening. Someone shouted his name. Then another. Then a dozen voices calling at once. David Cole walked through them without stopping. He got into the SUV, the door closed, the noise disappeared. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Airport, sir?" "Airport." The car pulled away from the curb, and David looked back at the tower through the rear window. 44 floors of glass and steel. His name was on the ownership documents of that building. His money was in its walls. And tonight, for the first time, he was glad, because the same power that built it was now going to reform it. Every floor, every policy, every person who thought they could look at a child and decide he didn't matter. At 9:47 p.m. Eastern, David Cole landed in New York. He took a car to Gloria's apartment in Harlem. He let himself in with his key. The apartment was quiet. A single lamp glowed in the living room. He walked to the spare bedroom. The door was open, just like he asked. Ethan was asleep on his side, one hand tucked under the pillow, the other gripping a red-colored pencil. His drawing pad was open next to him, and on the page was the airplane he'd been working on all day. Big wings, red tail, and underneath, in the careful block letters of an 8-year-old boy, that single word, home. David stood in the doorway and watched his son breathe. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, a man who had shaken a corporation to its foundation that afternoon, watching the slow rise and fall of his child's chest. Then he walked in, sat on the edge of the bed, and placed his hand gently on Ethan's back. "I'm here," he whispered. "Daddy's here. Nobody's ever going to do that to you again." Ethan stirred. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. His hand released the red pencil and reached out blindly until it found his father's arm. He held on, and David Cole sat in that dark room and made a promise that had nothing to do with boardrooms or bylaws or billion-dollar holdings. He made the promise every father makes when the world hurts his child. Never again. David didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair next to Ethan's bed until 3 a.m, watching his son's chest rise and fall, listening to the small sounds a child makes when he's deep in a dream. At some point, Ethan rolled over and murmured something David couldn't make out. Then the boy went still again, his hand still curled around the red-colored pencil. At 3:15 a.m., David walked into Gloria's kitchen. She was already there, sitting at the table, 2 cups of coffee poured. She hadn't slept either. David sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Gloria watched her son the way only a mother can, reading every line on his face, measuring the weight he was carrying. "Tell me everything," she said. So he did. He told her about the video, about the 48%, about the boardroom, about Henderson's face going white, about Richard Adler sitting down when he was told to sit down, about the frozen bonuses and the suspended expansion and the 48-hour deadline. Gloria listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took a sip of coffee and set the cup down carefully. And then what? Then I reformed the whole thing, top to bottom. I'm not asking about the company, David. I'm asking about your son. David looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, you just walked into a room full of powerful men and made them afraid of you. Good. They should be afraid. But tomorrow morning, that boy in there is going to wake up and he's going to need his father. Not the man who owns 48% of anything. His father. The one who irons his shirts and makes him pancakes and holds his hand at air shows. David stared at his coffee. I know, Mom. Do you? Because I've watched you do this before. Something hurts you and you go to war. You go into that mode where everything is strategy and leverage and control. And that works in boardrooms, but it doesn't work at breakfast with an 8-year-old who wants to know why a stranger grabbed his arm. David's jaw tightened. I can do both. Then prove it. Be in that room when he opens his eyes. Not on the phone, not answering emails. In that room, looking at him. David nodded. He picked up his coffee, took a long drink, and stood up. I will. Gloria caught his wrist as he passed. David, I'm proud of you, but don't lose the father inside the fighter. That boy needs both. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. Yes, ma'am. At 6:42 a.m., Ethan woke up. He opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was his father sitting in the chair beside his bed, still in his dress shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled up, watching him. Dad? Ethan sat up fast. Dad, you're here. I'm here, buddy. Ethan threw himself across the bed and into David's arms. He hit him so hard the chair slid back 6 inches. David caught him and held him and closed his eyes. And for a moment, the entire world narrowed down to the weight of his son against his chest. You came, Ethan said into his shoulder. Of course I came. I'll always come. They stayed like that for a long time. Then Ethan pulled back and looked at his father's face. Are you okay, Dad? You look tired. David almost laughed. His 8-year-old, the one who'd been humiliated in front of 200 people, was asking if he was okay. I'm fine, buddy. How are you? And I don't want the brave answer. I want the real one. Ethan's eyes dropped. He picked at the edge of the blanket. I keep thinking about it. About what happened on the plane? Ethan nodded. She said I didn't belong there. She said people actually paid for those seats, like I was lying, like I stole something. David's hands curled into fists beneath the blanket where Ethan couldn't see them. You didn't steal anything. You were exactly where you were supposed to be. Then why did she do it? David took a breath. He'd been preparing for this question since the moment he saw the video. He'd rehearsed a dozen versions in his head. But sitting here, looking at his son's face, every rehearsed answer fell apart. Because she made a judgment about you that had nothing to do with who you are. She looked at you and made a decision based on something that should never matter. And she was wrong, Ethan. Completely, totally wrong. Marcus said I did everything right. Marcus was right. You did. But I still got moved. David felt that sentence hit him in the chest like a fist. But I still got moved. The logic of an 8-year-old. I did everything right, and it didn't matter. That was the real damage. Not the humiliation, not the video. The lesson that doing everything right still isn't enough. Listen to me. David held Ethan's face in both hands. What happened to you was not fair, and it was not your fault. And I'm going to make sure it never happens again. Not to you, not to any kid. Ethan searched his father's eyes. Promise? I promise. At 8 a.m. Eastern, while Ethan sat at Gloria's kitchen table eating pancakes his father made from scratch, the story exploded again. A reporter at the Washington Post published a deep investigation. The headline hit like a bomb. Airline had 3 prior bias complaints against flight attendant. All were buried. The article named Linda Parker. It named Greg Sullivan. It detailed the internal complaint process and how each report was filed, acknowledged, and then quietly closed with no action. One complaint was from a black businessman who'd been questioned about his first-class ticket in 2021. Another was from a Latina mother traveling with her daughter in 2022. Both had written formal letters. Both received form responses. Both were ignored. Janet called David at 8:14 a.m. "Have you seen the Post?" "Reading it now." "It's worse than we thought. Sullivan didn't just dismiss the complaints, he actively intervened. He pulled them from the review queue before they reached the Oversight Committee. There's a paper trail, David. Emails, internal memos. He wrote to his team, and I'm quoting here, 'Handle this quietly. No escalation needed.'" David set down the spatula. He was standing in his mother's kitchen, and his son was 10 feet away eating pancakes. And the world was burning. "Janet, get those documents to Raymond. Everything, before the board meeting Thursday." "Already done." "And Janet, find the 2 passengers who filed those earlier complaints, the businessman and the mother. Get me their contact information." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to apologize to them personally, because nobody else ever did." At 9:30 a.m., Linda Parker's name was everywhere. Not just the video anymore. Now it was the complaints, the cover-ups, the pattern. Twitter turned vicious. Her home address was leaked by someone online. Her neighbors were being approached by reporters. Camera crews parked outside her apartment building in Atlanta. At 10 a.m., Linda Parker's attorney released a statement. It said Linda had served the airline faithfully for 22 years. It said the incident was a misunderstanding. It said she was cooperating with the internal investigation. It said she felt terrible about what happened. It said nothing about grabbing a child's arm. It said nothing about ignoring a boarding pass. It said nothing about the 2 prior complaints she knew had been filed against her and dismissed. At 10:15 a.m., Marcus Hill did something nobody expected. He went on CNN. He didn't plan it. A producer had tracked him down through social media, and Marcus, who normally avoided cameras the way he avoided small talk, said yes. He said yes because he'd been up all night thinking about Ethan's face, about those big brown eyes looking up at him from row 26, asking, "Am I in trouble?" The anchor asked him to describe what he saw. Marcus looked directly into the camera. "I saw a woman in uniform physically remove a child from his seat. She didn't ask questions. She didn't verify his ticket. She grabbed him, an 8-year-old boy, flying alone. And she dragged him down the aisle like he had done something criminal. He hadn't done anything. He was drawing airplanes." "What went through your mind in that moment?" the anchor asked. "Honestly, I've been in combat, 2 tours. I've seen things that keep me up at night. But watching that boy get pulled out of his seat, watching him try to hold it together, watching him whisper that he didn't do anything wrong, that got to me in a way I wasn't ready for." "There are people online saying you're a hero." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm a man who stood up when something was wrong. That should be normal. That shouldn't be heroic. The fact that people are calling it heroic tells you everything you need to know about where we are." The interview went viral within the hour. 32 million views by noon. Marcus Hill, the quiet former Marine who didn't want to be on camera, became the second face of a story that was now reshaping a national conversation. At 11 a.m., the airline's board released their first public statement. It was exactly what David feared. Corporate language, passive voice. "We are deeply concerned by the incident. We are committed to reviewing our policies. We value every passenger." No names. No accountability. No mention of the prior complaints. David read it on his phone while Ethan was in the living room drawing with Gloria. He called Raymond. "Did you see this statement?" "I saw it." "Who approved it?" "Adler's communications team. They drafted it at 6 this morning." "It's garbage, Raymond. It says nothing. It admits nothing." "I know." "They have 37 hours left. If the next statement looks anything like this, I go to the press myself. David, some of the directors are pushing back. They think you're moving too fast. Clark is talking about calling a special vote to limit your authority. David laughed. One short, humorless sound. Clark owns 3%. Let him try. By the time he assembles enough votes, I'll have already restructured the governance charter. Tell Clark I said good luck. At 12:30 p.m., something shifted. Sheila Rodriguez, the young flight attendant who had spoken up on the plane, posted a video on her personal Instagram. She was sitting in her apartment, still in the t-shirt she'd slept in, eyes red, voice raw. "I need to say something," she began. "I've worked for this airline for 8 months. I love flying. I love taking care of passengers. But what I saw on that flight broke something in me. Linda Parker did not make a mistake. She made a choice. She looked at that little boy, and she decided he didn't belong in first class. I watched her ignore his boarding pass. I watched her grab his arm. I watched her drag him past every row on that plane. And I want to say something to Ethan, if he's watching this, or if his family is watching this. You did belong there, baby. You belonged in that seat. You belonged on that plane. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I should have stepped in the second she touched you. I waited too long, and I'm going to carry that with me." She wiped her eyes. "I also need to say this. This is not the first time. I've only been here 8 months, and I've already seen things that made me uncomfortable. Comments about passengers, assumptions about who belongs where. It's not just Linda. It's a culture. And if saying that cost me my job, then it cost me my job. But I can't stay quiet anymore." The video hit 10 million views in 3 hours. At 2 p.m., the airline's HR department received 14 new internal complaints. Flight attendants, gate agents, ground crew, all coming forward with stories of bias, discrimination, and retaliation. 14 complaints in 2 hours. A dam had broken, and Sheila Rodriguez had been the crack. David watched Sheila's video in Gloria's kitchen. He watched it twice. Then he called Raymond. "Find out who Sheila Rodriguez is. I want to make sure she's protected. If the airline retaliates against her in any way, I want to know about it immediately." David, HR is in chaos right now. 14 new complaints just dropped. Good. That means people are finally talking. Some of the board members are calling it a witch hunt. Some of the board members buried 3 complaints and let a woman with a documented pattern of discrimination keep working with the public for 4 years. They don't get to use the word witch hunt. At 3:30 p.m., Henderson made his move. He called an emergency sidebar with Clark and 2 other directors. They drafted a motion to challenge David's authority, arguing that his personal involvement in the incident constituted a conflict of interest. Raymond called David within the hour. They're filing the motion tonight. They want to argue that you can't make governance decisions because your son is the victim. David was sitting on Gloria's couch. Ethan was asleep next to him, head on his father's lap, hands still clutching the red-colored pencil. Let me understand this. They want to argue that a father whose child was assaulted by a company employee has a conflict of interest in demanding accountability from that company. That's the argument. And they think this is going to play well with the public, with the press, with the 67 million people who have watched my son be dragged down an aisle. Raymond was quiet. I told them it was a bad idea. It's not a bad idea, Raymond. It's a gift, because now I know exactly who I'm dealing with. David looked down at Ethan sleeping on his lap. The boy's face was peaceful. No tension, no fear, just the deep, trusting sleep of a child who knows his father is close. Raymond, I want you to do something for me. I want you to leak Henderson's motion to the press. David, leak it. Let the world see that while 67 million people are watching a child be humiliated, 4 board members are trying to silence his father. Let them explain that on camera. Raymond paused for a long time. You know what this means. Henderson will be finished. Henderson finished himself the day he let his brother-in-law bury those complaints. At 5 p.m., the story broke. Every major outlet ran it. Airline board members attempt to silence father of victim. The backlash was instantaneous and savage. Henderson's photo was everywhere. His LinkedIn profile was flooded with messages. His personal email was leaked. Within 2 hours, advertisers started pulling contracts from the airline. 3 major corporate travel partners announced they were reviewing their agreements. The airline's stock dropped another 6%. At 6 p.m., Henderson called David directly. His voice was thin and desperate. "David, this has gone too far. We need to talk." "We talked on Tuesday, Henderson, in the boardroom. You sat there and said nothing while I showed you a video of my son being assaulted." "I understand you're upset. I'm not upset. I was upset on Tuesday. Today, I'm strategic. There's a difference." "What do you want?" "I want your resignation, and Clark's, on my desk by Thursday morning." "You can't force me to resign." "You're right. I can't force you, but I can make sure every shareholder in Orion Holdings receives a full briefing on your brother-in-law's role in burying 3 discrimination complaints, including the internal emails where he wrote, "Handle this quietly." I can make sure that briefing goes out before the next shareholder meeting. And then you won't have to resign, Henderson. They'll vote you out. The line went dead. Henderson hung up. But David knew. He could hear it in the man's breathing. The fight was over. Henderson just didn't know it yet. At 7 p.m., David sat at Gloria's kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. Ethan was in the bath. Gloria was reading him a story through the bathroom door, doing different voices for the characters, making the boy laugh. David could hear that laugh through 2 walls, and every time it reached him, something loosened in his chest. He wrote 3 words at the top of the legal pad. What comes next? He stared at those words for a long time. Then he started writing. Not notes for the board, not legal strategy, not talking points. He started writing a letter to his son. The kind of letter a father writes when he knows his child has been changed by something, and he wants to make sure the change goes in the right direction. He wrote about dignity. He wrote about what it means to stand in your truth even when someone tells you it doesn't count. He wrote about Marcus, a stranger on a plane who stood up because it was right. He wrote about Sheila, a young woman who risked her career because silence was worse than fear. He wrote about Gloria, a grandmother who got on her knees at an airport gate because love doesn't care who's watching. And he wrote about himself, about what he'd learned in boardrooms and what he'd failed to learn, about how power means nothing if it doesn't protect the people who need it most. He wrote 4 pages. Then he folded them, put them in an envelope, and wrote Ethan's name on the front. Not for today, for later, for the day when Ethan was old enough to understand everything that happened and needed to hear it from his father's hand. At 9 p.m., David tucked Ethan into bed. The boy was clean, fed, and calm. The laughter from bath time still hung in the air. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Are we going to be okay?" David sat on the edge of the bed. He took his son's hand. "Yeah, buddy, we're going to be okay." "Is the lady going to get in trouble?" "She's going to be held accountable. That's not the same as trouble. It means she has to face what she did." "Is she sorry?" David thought about the attorney's statement, the corporate language, the careful words that said everything and nothing. "I don't know, son, but whether she's sorry or not, things are going to change. I'm making sure of it." Ethan was quiet. Then he said something that stopped David's heart. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be like Marcus." David blinked. "Like Marcus?" "Yeah, he wasn't scared. He just stood up. He didn't yell or anything. He just said what was right. I want to be like that." David looked at his son for a long time. Then he leaned down and kissed his forehead. "You already are, Ethan. You already are." The boy closed his eyes. David stayed until his breathing slowed. Then he stood up, walked to the doorway, and turned back one more time. 8 years old, drawing airplanes, wanting to be like the stranger who picked up his pencils. David reached into his pocket and touched the envelope with Ethan's name on it. Someday, he thought, someday you'll read this and you'll understand. But tonight, you just sleep. He turned off the light and pulled the door halfway closed. Tomorrow, the 48-hour deadline would expire. Tomorrow, the board would have to answer. Tomorrow, the world would be watching. But tonight, in a small apartment in Harlem, an 8-year-old boy who had been told he didn't belong was sleeping peacefully in his grandmother's spare bedroom, holding a red-colored pencil, dreaming about airplanes. And his father was ready for whatever came next. The 48-hour deadline expired at 7 p.m. Thursday. David was in a car heading back to Dallas when his phone rang. Raymond. They blinked. Tell me. Henderson submitted his resignation 20 minutes ago. Clark followed 10 minutes later. The letter is formal, cites personal reasons, but it's done. They're out. David closed his eyes. And the statement? Adler's team sent a new draft 30 minutes ago. It's different this time. They name Linda Parker. They acknowledge the prior complaints. They acknowledge the internal failures. They use the word discrimination. Twice. Who signed off on it? Adler himself. And David, there's something else. Adler, at 5:30 p.m. Central, David walked into Orion Holdings headquarters for the second time in 3 days. The lobby was different now. Security was doubled. 2 PR handlers stood near the elevators, whispering into phones. A television mounted on the lobby wall was tuned to CNN, and David caught a flash of his own name in the chyron before he looked away. He took the elevator to 44. Raymond met him at the doors. Adler's in the small conference room. He's been there for an hour. He looks like he hasn't slept. Good. David walked down the corridor and pushed open the door. Richard Adler was sitting alone at a table meant for 4. His tie was loosened. His jacket was draped over the back of his chair. He looked up when David entered, and for the first time, David saw something he hadn't seen in the boardroom 2 days ago. Not fear. Shame. David, thank you for... You have 30 minutes, Richard. Use them. Adler nodded. And when complaints came in, I trusted the chain of command to handle them. I didn't ask questions. I didn't follow up. I let the machine run, and the machine crushed a child. David said nothing. He let the silence do its work. I'm not going to insult you with excuses, Adler continued. I knew Sullivan cut corners. I didn't know about the buried complaints specifically, but I should have. It was my job to know, and I didn't do my job. What are you asking me, Richard? I'm asking you to let me help fix this. Not to save my career. I know my career is probably over, but I know this airline from the inside. I know where the rot is. I know which managers look the other way and which ones fight for the right thing. If you're going to rebuild this, you need someone who knows where the bodies are buried. David studied him. 15 seconds. 20. Adler didn't flinch. He didn't look away. If you stay, David said, it's not as CEO of the airline division. That position is being restructured. You'd report to the new oversight committee. You'd have no authority over personnel decisions. And the first time I catch you protecting someone who should be held accountable, you're done. No meeting, no conversation. Just done. Adler swallowed hard. I understand. One more thing. Tomorrow morning, you're going to stand in front of cameras and read that statement yourself. Not a spokesperson, not a PR team. You. And you're going to look into that camera and say what you just said to me, that you failed. I'll do it. David stood up. Then be in the boardroom in 20 minutes. He walked out and found Raymond in the hallway. He stays. Reduced role. Full transparency. If he steps out of line, we cut him immediately. Raymond raised an eyebrow. You trust him? No, but I believe he's ashamed. And right now, shame is more useful to me than trust. At 6 p.m. Central, the full board convened. 10 directors in the room, 2 on screen. Henderson's chair was empty. Clark's was empty. The absence was louder than anything anyone could have said. David stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit. Henderson and Clark are gone. The public statement goes out at 9 p.m. tonight, signed by Adler. Tomorrow morning, Adler reads it on camera. That's settled. Now we talk about what comes next. He pulled a document from his jacket and placed it on the table. 27 pages. Raymond had worked through the night to compile it. This is a complete restructuring proposal for the airline's passenger handling, hiring, training, and internal complaint systems. I'm going to walk you through it, and then you're going to vote. A director named Margaret Wu, the longest-serving woman on the board, leaned forward. David, we've all seen the proposal Raymond circulated. Some of us have concerns about the timeline. You're asking for company-wide implementation in 90 days. That's aggressive. 90 days is generous, Margaret. My son was assaulted 4 days ago. The prior complaints go back 4 years. I've been generous with time. I'm done being generous. Margaret held his gaze. I'm not pushing back on the substance. I'm pushing back on the execution. If we rush this, we get a policy that looks good on paper and falls apart in the field. I've seen it happen. I don't want a press release. I want actual change. David paused. He respected Margaret. She was the only board member who had called him personally after the video went viral. Not to strategize, not to cover her position. She had called to say, I'm sorry this happened to your son. What do you need? What do you suggest? He asked. 90 days for the policy framework, 6 months for full implementation with quarterly audits, and an independent oversight committee that reports directly to the board, not to operations, not to Adler, not to anyone in the chain that failed. David looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. Done. But the Oversight Committee isn't just internal. I want external members, civil rights advocates, aviation industry experts, and at least one person who's filed a discrimination complaint against this airline and was ignored. The room shifted. Directors glanced at each other. That last condition was a bomb, and David knew it. Putting a victim on the committee that governed the company that had wronged them. It was unprecedented. Margaret smiled. I second that. The vote was called, 9-1. The lone dissenter was a director named Forsyth, a quiet man who had never spoken up in any meeting David could remember. He voted no without explanation and then stared at the table for the rest of the session. David made a mental note of that. Forsyth would bear watching. At 7:15 p.m., David called Gloria from the hallway outside the boardroom. How's my boy? He's good, David. He drew 12 airplanes today. 12. Your mother's refrigerator looks like an air show. David laughed. A real laugh. The first one in 4 days. He asked about you, Gloria said. Twice. I told him you were working and you'd call before bed. Put him on. There was a shuffle, a clatter. Then Ethan's voice, bright and rushing like he'd been holding words in all day. Dad, I drew a plane that has 2 levels, like a double-decker bus, but it flies. And Grandma said it could never work, but I said if they can make buildings with 100 floors, they can make a plane with 2. David pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes and let his son's voice wash over him. That's exactly right, buddy. 2 floors. Why not? And Dad, I named it the Coal Flyer. David's throat went tight. The Coal Flyer. I love that. When are you coming back? Tomorrow, buddy. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. Promise? I promise. Ethan, I need to ask you something. Okay. How are you feeling? For real. A pause. The kind of pause that tells you a child is thinking hard about whether to tell the truth or say what they think you want to hear. I'm okay, Dad, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her face, the lady, and I hear her voice. And I feel her hand on my arm. David pressed his fist against his forehead. That's normal, buddy. When something scary happens, your brain replays it for a while. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means your brain is processing it. Does it stop? It gets quieter, I promise. And you know what helps? What? Drawing airplanes. Ethan laughed, that bright, pure 8-year-old laugh. I already drew 12. Then draw 12 more. I'll see them all tomorrow. At 9 p.m. Central, the airline released its revised public statement. It was carried live on every major network. The statement named Linda Parker. It acknowledged the 3 prior complaints. It acknowledged the internal failures. It used the word discrimination. It announced the executive restructuring. It announced the independent oversight committee. And it ended with a direct apology to Ethan Cole and his family. Not a corporate apology, a real one, with Adler's name on it. The public reaction was mixed. Some praised the airline for accountability. Others said it was too little, too late. Activist groups called for a federal investigation. Aviation industry analysts said the restructuring was the most aggressive internal reform any airline had undertaken in 2 decades. David didn't read the reactions. He was already on to the next thing. At 9:30 p.m., he called Janet. The 2 passengers who filed prior complaints, did you reach them? Both of them. The businessman, Michael Okafor, is in Houston. He said he filed his complaint in 2021 and never heard back. He said, and I'm quoting, "I gave up. I figured nobody cared." The mother, Rosa Gutierrez, is in Phoenix. She cried when I called her. She said she thought she was the only one. David sat down. He rubbed his face with both hands. Set up calls with both of them. Tomorrow. I want to talk to them personally. Oh, David, are you sure? Legally, this could... Janet, I'm not calling them as a stakeholder. I'm calling them as a father who knows what it feels like to watch someone treat your child like they don't matter. Set up the calls. Friday morning, 8 a.m. Central. Richard Adler stood in front of a bank of cameras outside Orion Holdings headquarters and read the statement. His voice shook twice. His eyes were red. When he reached the line about Ethan, he stopped. He took a breath. He looked directly into the camera and said, "We failed a child, an 8-year-old boy who did everything right, and we are going to spend every day earning back the trust we destroyed." A reporter shouted a question. "Is Linda Parker being terminated?" Adler paused. "Linda Parker has been suspended pending a full investigation. I cannot comment on the outcome, but I can tell you that the investigation is being conducted by an independent firm, not by our internal team." Another reporter. "David Cole owns 48% of this company. Is he running the show now?" Adler looked at the camera. "David Cole is a stakeholder who demanded accountability. Every change we are implementing was voted on by the full board. This isn't one man's decision. This is the right decision." At 10 a.m., David called Michael Okafor. Michael was 51, an accountant from Houston. He'd been flying from Dallas to Chicago in 2021 when a flight attendant, Linda Parker, questioned his first-class ticket and asked him to show additional identification. No other passenger was asked. He filed a complaint. He received a form letter 3 weeks later. He never heard from the airline again. "Mr. Cole, I don't even know what to say. When your assistant called me, I thought it was a prank." "It's not a prank, Michael. I called to tell you that your complaint mattered. It should have been investigated. It should have led to consequences. And I am personally sorry that it didn't." Michael was quiet for a moment. "I sat in that seat and I felt so small. I'm a grown man, 51 years old. I've run my own firm for 20 years, and this woman made me feel like I had stolen something, like I was a fraud." "I know. My son felt the same thing. He's 8. "I saw the video, Mr. Cole. I watched it and I cried. Because I knew exactly what that boy was feeling. That confusion, that shame. That voice in your head asking what you did wrong when you know you didn't do anything. Michael, I'm forming an oversight committee, independent, outside the company. I want you on it." "Me? You were the first person to speak up. Your complaint should have stopped this years ago. You deserve a seat at that table more than anyone." Michael didn't answer right away. David could hear him breathing on the other end. Then, very quietly, "Yes, I'll do it." At 11 a.m., David called Rosa Gutierrez. Rosa was 38, a single mother from Phoenix. In 2022, she and her 6-year-old daughter were flying to visit family. Linda Parker approached them in their assigned seats and asked if they were in the right section. Rosa showed her boarding passes. Parker asked to see them a second time, then a third time. Rosa filed a complaint that night. She received a form letter. She called the airline 4 times to follow up. Each time she was told the matter was under review. She never received a resolution. "Mrs. Gutierrez, my name is David Cole." "I know who you are. I've been watching the news. Is your son okay?" "He's getting there. Thank you for asking." "My daughter is 8 now, same age as Ethan. She still talks about what happened on that plane. She asked me last year, 'Mama, do planes only let certain people sit in the front?' How do you answer that?" David felt the weight of that question settle on his chest. You tell her the truth, and then you change the system. Mr. Cole, I filed that complaint and nothing happened. I called 4 times. They treated me like I was the problem. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm calling to ask you something. I'm building a committee to oversee this airline's policies from the outside. Civil rights advocates, industry experts, and I want people who experience this firsthand. I want you on that committee, Rosa. She was crying. He could hear it. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The tears of a woman who had been ignored for 2 years and was finally being heard. Why me? Because you called 4 times. Because you didn't give up. Because your daughter deserves to know that her mother's voice mattered. I'll do it. I'll do it for Isabella. At 12 p.m. Friday, while David was still in Dallas, something extraordinary happened in New York. Marcus Hill showed up at Gloria's apartment. He hadn't called ahead. He'd flown in from Atlanta that morning, taken a cab from the airport, and knocked on the door holding a brown paper bag. Gloria opened the door. She recognized him immediately. Marcus. Ma'am, I hope I'm not overstepping. I just wanted to check on the boy. Gloria pulled the door open wide. Get in here. Ethan was at the kitchen table, drawing. He looked up and his eyes went wide. Marcus! He scrambled off his chair and ran across the room and threw his arms around Marcus's waist. Marcus caught him and lifted him up, and the big man, who had stayed composed on CNN and kept his cool at 30,000 feet, felt his eyes fill with water. Hey, buddy, look at you. You look good. I drew you a picture. Ethan wriggled down and ran back to the table. He grabbed a sheet of paper and held it up. It was an airplane. Big wings, red tail, and standing next to it were 2 stick figures, one small, one large. Underneath in block letters it said, Marcus and Ethan. Marcus took the drawing and looked at it for a long time. His jaw was working, his chest was heaving. Gloria put her hand on his arm. Sit down, baby. I'll make you some coffee. Marcus sat at the kitchen table across from Ethan, and the 2 of them started drawing together. Marcus was terrible at it. His airplane looked like a rectangle with sticks poking out. Ethan laughed so hard he almost fell off his chair. Marcus, that's not even close. I'm a Marine, kid. We don't draw planes. We jump out of them. Ethan's mouth dropped open. You jumped out of a plane? 14 times. Was it scary? Marcus thought about it. First time? Yeah, real scary. But you know what I learned? What? Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're about to do something brave. Ethan went quiet. He looked at his drawing, at the small stick figure standing next to the big one. I was scared on the plane when she grabbed me. I know you were. But I didn't run. I stayed in my seat until she made me move. That's right. You stood your ground, Ethan. At 8 years old, you stood your ground. My dad says I did everything right. Your dad is a smart man. And he's right. Ethan picked up his red pencil and started adding something new to his drawing. A 3rd stick figure, smaller than the other 2, standing between them. Who's that? Marcus asked. That's me, in the middle, because you're on one side and my dad's on the other side, and nobody can get to me. Marcus set the pencil down because his hand wasn't steady enough to hold it anymore. Gloria stood at the kitchen counter watching them, coffee cup in both hands, tears streaming down her face, not making a sound. She didn't wipe them away, she let them fall. Some tears you earn. Some tears are proof that the world, broken and ugly and cruel as it can be, still has moments that make it worth fighting for. At 3 p.m. Friday, David landed at LaGuardia. He took a car to Gloria's apartment. He walked through the door and found his son at the kitchen table, drawing airplanes with a former Marine, laughing harder than David had heard him laugh in months. Ethan saw him and launched off the chair. Dad! David caught him midair, held him, squeezed him, felt the boy's heartbeat against his chest, fast and happy and alive. I missed you, buddy. Dad, Marcus came. He came to see me, and he's terrible at drawing. I heard. Rectangles with sticks. Marcus stood up and extended his hand. David set Ethan down and shook it. Firm. 2 men who didn't need to say much because they both understood what was at stake. Thank you, David said, for what you did on that plane, for standing up. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I know you would. That's why I want to talk to you about something. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. He set it on the kitchen table next to Ethan's drawings. I'm launching a mentorship program nationwide for kids from underserved communities who want careers in aviation. Pilots, engineers, mechanics, designers. I'm funding it through Orion Holdings, and I need someone to lead it. Someone kids look up to. Someone who's already proven he'll stand up when it counts. Marcus stared at the folder. You're asking me? I'm asking you. Mr. Cole, I'm a retired Marine who drives a truck for a living. I don't know anything about running a program. You know how to lead. You know how to protect. You know how to look a scared kid in the eye and make him feel like he matters. That's more than any MBA will teach you. Marcus looked at Ethan. The boy was watching him with those big brown eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at him from row 26, asking, Am I in trouble? What's the program called? Marcus asked. David smiled. He looked at his son. Ethan, what was the name of that airplane you designed? The one with 2 levels? Ethan grinned. The Cole Flyer. David turned back to Marcus. The Cole Flyer program. Scholarships, internships, and mentorship for the next generation of black and brown kids in aviation. And I want you at the front of it. Marcus picked up the folder. He opened it. He read the first page. His hands were steady now. When do we start? David put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. We already did. Ethan grabbed his drawing and held it up between them, the airplane, the 3 stick figures. Marcus and Ethan and the small figure in the middle, standing between 2 men who would never let anyone push him aside again. Dad, can this be the logo? David looked at the drawing. Big wings, red tail, 3 figures standing together. Yeah, buddy, that's the logo. 2 weeks after Marcus accepted the position, the story took a turn that nobody saw coming. Linda Parker requested a meeting with David Cole. Not through lawyers, not through the airline. She called Raymond Holt directly at 7 a.m. and said she had something to say and she wanted to say it to the father, not to the board, not to the cameras, not to the internet. Raymond called David immediately. She says it's personal. No attorneys, no recording, just a conversation. David was in his Chicago office. He set down his coffee and stared at the photograph of Ethan on his desk. The one from the air show. The boy on his shoulders, mouth open, pointing at the sky. Where? She's in Atlanta. She'll come to wherever you want. David thought about it for a long time, longer than he usually took to make a decision. Part of him wanted to say no. The rational part, the strategic part, the part that knew this woman had grabbed his son and dragged him down an aisle and told him he didn't belong. But another part of him, the part that Gloria raised, the part that still heard his mother's voice saying, "Don't lose the father inside the fighter," that part said something different. New York, David said. Gloria's apartment, Saturday morning. Raymond paused. David, are you sure your mother's home? If she wants to say something personal, she can say it in a personal place. And if she tries anything, my mother will handle her before I do. Saturday, 9 a.m. Gloria's apartment in Harlem. David sat at the kitchen table. Gloria stood by the counter, arms crossed. Ethan was in the spare bedroom with Marcus, who had driven up from Atlanta that morning and was currently losing badly at a card game the boy had invented, with rules that changed every 30 seconds. The buzzer rang. Gloria pressed the intercom. It's Linda Parker. Gloria looked at David. He nodded. She buzzed her in. The door opened and Linda stepped inside. She looked nothing like the woman in the video. The uniform was gone. The raised chin was gone. The authority was gone. She was wearing a plain gray sweater and dark pants, and she was holding her hands in front of her, the way people do when they're not sure what to do with them. She was 54 years old, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Mr. Cole, her voice was thin, thank you for seeing me. David didn't stand. Sit down, Miss Parker. She sat across from him. Gloria remained standing. Linda glanced at her once, then looked away fast, because whatever she saw in Gloria's eyes was not something she was ready to face. Say what you came to say, David said. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her hands were trembling on the table. I came to tell you that I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry my lawyer wrote. Not the kind of sorry you say to make something go away. The real kind. The kind that keeps you up at night and follows you into every room and sits on your chest until you can't breathe. David said nothing. I grabbed your son. I grabbed an 8-year-old boy and I pulled him out of his seat and I marched him to the back of that plane. And I did it because when I looked at him, I didn't see a child with a ticket. I saw something else. Something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose. I've been telling myself for 2 weeks that it was a mistake, that I was just following procedure, that I was doing my job. But that's a lie. I know it's a lie. There was no procedure. There was no policy. There was just me looking at a black child in first class and deciding he didn't belong there. And I need to say that out loud, because if I don't, I'm going to carry that lie for the rest of my life. Gloria spoke from the counter. Her voice was steady, and it cut through the room like a blade. You said my grandson didn't belong in his seat. Where exactly did you think he belonged? Linda flinched. She turned toward Gloria. Ma'am, answer the question. I didn't think. That's the truth. I didn't think about where he belonged. I just decided where he didn't belong. And that's worse. I know that's worse. Gloria stared at her for a long time. My grandson asked me why you moved him. Do you know what I told him? No, ma'am. I told him it was your sickness, not his. Gloria's voice didn't waver. I want you to sit with that. A grandmother had to explain to an 8-year-old that a grown woman's prejudice was a kind of sickness. That's what you put on my family. Linda's head dropped. Tears fell onto the kitchen table. She didn't wipe them away. David watched her. He watched the way her shoulders shook. He watched the way her hands gripped each other until the knuckles went white. He was looking for performance, looking for the rehearsed apology, the calculated tears, the kind of show people put on when they know cameras might be watching. He didn't find it. What he found was a woman sitting in a stranger's kitchen, stripped of her uniform and her authority and her 22-year career, facing the consequences of a choice she could never undo. Mrs. Parker, David said, I'm not going to tell you I forgive you. Not today. Maybe not ever. That's not why I agreed to this meeting. She looked up. Her face was swollen and raw. I agreed because my son asked me a question last week. He asked me if you were sorry, and I told him I didn't know. I wanted to be able to answer him honestly. I am sorry. I swear to God, I am sorry. Then prove it. Not to me, not to the cameras. Prove it with your life. Because words are easy, Ms. Parker. Words cost nothing. What you did to my son, what you did to Michael Okafor and Rosa Gutierrez and whoever else you treated that way and never got caught, that cost something. That left marks. And no apology in this kitchen is going to erase them. Linda nodded. She stood up slowly. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Mr. Cole, I know I have no right to ask you anything. But if there's ever a way, any way at all, that I can be part of fixing what I broke, I want to do it. Not for my reputation. I don't have one anymore. For the boy. For your son. Because every time I close my eyes, I see his face, and I hear him saying he didn't do anything wrong. And I know that voice is going to be with me until the day I die. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the knob. She turned to Gloria. Ma'am, you were right. It is a sickness, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to heal it. She left. The door closed behind her. Gloria and David sat in silence for a full minute. Then Gloria walked to the table, sat down across from her son, and took his hands. What are you going to tell Ethan? David thought about it. The truth, that she came, that she said she was sorry, that sorry is a start, but it's not the finish. That's a good answer. Mom, do you believe her? Gloria looked at the door Linda had walked through. I believe she's in pain. Whether that pain turns into change or just turns into self-pity, that's up to her. We've got our own work to do. In the spare bedroom, Ethan shouted, Marcus, you can't do that. I just changed the rules. Marcus shouted back, You change the rules every 10 seconds. This game is rigged. David and Gloria looked at each other. and for the first time in 2 weeks, the weight in the room lifted just enough to breathe. 3 days later, David appeared on national television. Good Morning America. The interview was scheduled for 12 minutes. It ran for 27. The anchor asked him about revenge. David shook his head. This was never about revenge. Revenge doesn't build anything. I have an 8-year-old son who loves airplanes. He wants to be a pilot. And I refuse to let his first experience in aviation be the thing that defines him. So instead of tearing something down, we're building something up. Tell me about the Cole Flyer program. It's a national initiative, scholarships, internships, and mentorship for young people from underserved communities who want careers in aviation. Pilots, engineers, mechanics, designers. We're partnering with 12 universities and 37 flight schools across the country. And it's run by a man named Marcus Hill, a former Marine who stood up on that plane when nobody else did. There are people saying you should have sued the airline into the ground, that you should have taken a massive settlement. Why didn't you? David leaned forward. Because a settlement is a transaction. It ends. What we're building doesn't end. Every kid who gets a scholarship through this program, every young person who steps into a cockpit or a design lab because someone believed in them, that's permanent. That outlasts any check. What about Linda Parker? She released a personal statement saying she met with you privately. Can you confirm that? She came to my mother's home. She apologized. I told her that apologies are a start, not a finish. Have you forgiven her? David paused. The studio was silent. 30 million people watched him think. I'm working on it. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a road you walk. And I'm on it. But I'm not at the end yet. After the interview aired, something remarkable happened. The Cole Flyer program received 11,000 applications in 72 hours. 11,000 young people from every state in the country. Kids from Detroit and Appalachia and the Navajo Nation and the south side of Chicago and small towns nobody had ever heard of. All of them raising their hands and saying, I want to fly. Marcus called David that night. Brother, we're going to need a bigger office. We're going to need a bigger everything. 2 weeks after the interview, David received an unexpected call. Captain James Whitfield, the pilot who had been flying the Atlanta to New York route that morning. The man who had announced over the intercom that the situation had been addressed. He'd been silent publicly since the incident, until now. Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. For what? For not doing more. I was informed mid-flight about the disturbance. My first officer wanted to go back and assess the situation personally. I told him to stay in the cockpit. I treated it as a cabin crew matter. I should have walked back there myself. I should have seen what was happening with my own eyes. And I didn't. David listened. I've been flying for 31 years. I've handled mechanical failures and medical emergencies and weather that would turn your hair white. But I failed a child on my aircraft because I assumed the crew had it under control. And that assumption is something I'm going to have to live with. What do you want to do about it, Captain? I want to meet your son. I want to show him the cockpit. I want to show him that the flight deck is a place where he belongs, where anyone belongs. And I want to look him in the eye and tell him that his captain should have done better. David called Ethan into the room. He put the phone on speaker. Ethan, this is Captain Whitfield. He was the pilot on your flight. Hello, sir, Ethan said, polite as ever. Ethan, I'd like to invite you to visit me at the airport. I'll show you the cockpit of a 737. Every instrument, every button, every switch. And I'll answer any question you have. Would you like that? Ethan looked at his father. His eyes were shining. Really? You'd show me everything? Everything. And Ethan, I want to tell you something. You are welcome on any aircraft I fly, any seat, any time. You belong there. And I'm sorry I didn't make sure you knew that when it mattered. Ethan's chin trembled. Not from sadness, from something bigger, from the feeling of a door opening that he thought had been closed. Thank you, Captain. The following Saturday, David drove Ethan to the airport. Marcus came along. Gloria insisted on coming too. Captain Whitfield met them at the gate in full uniform. He shook David's hand. He shook Marcus's hand. He hugged Gloria because Gloria hugged everyone and nobody refused. Then he knelt down in front of Ethan. Ready to see the flight deck, son? Ethan nodded so fast his whole body moved. They walked down the deck bridge together. Ethan held the captain's hand with his right and clutched his drawing pad with his left. When they reached the cockpit door, the captain stepped aside. "Go ahead, you first." Ethan stepped in. He looked at the instruments, the throttles, the yoke, the windscreen stretching out to the runway. His mouth fell open the way it had at the air show when he was 3, that pure, unguarded wonder that only children have. "Can I sit in the captain's seat?" "That's exactly where you're supposed to sit." Ethan climbed up. His feet didn't reach the floor. His hands barely wrapped around the yoke. But he sat there, this 8-year-old boy, in the captain's chair of a commercial aircraft, and he looked out the windscreen at the wide-open runway, and he smiled. Not the careful smile of a child being polite, the real one, the one that starts somewhere deep inside and breaks across the face like sunrise. Captain Whitfield stood behind him and pointed out every instrument: altitude, airspeed, heading, fuel, navigation. Ethan asked questions for 45 minutes straight. Where does this gauge go when you're in a cloud? What happens if both engines stop? How fast do you have to go before the wheels leave the ground? The captain answered every single one. David stood in the doorway and watched. Marcus stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Gloria took a photograph on her phone. Ethan in the captain's seat, grinning, both hands on the yoke, the runway stretching out ahead of him. She would frame that photograph and put it on her wall next to the 12 airplane drawings, and for the rest of her life, whenever someone asked about her grandson, she would point to that picture and say, "That's my baby. He's going to fly." When they left the cockpit, Ethan was carrying something the captain had given him, a pair of pilot wings. The metal kind, not the plastic ones they hand out to children, real ones, from the captain's own uniform. "You earn the rest," Captain Whitfield said, "but those wings are yours now." Ethan pinned them to his polo shirt and didn't take them off for 3 days. He wore them to bed. He wore them to breakfast. He wore them while drawing airplanes at Gloria's kitchen table. The Coal Flyer program launched officially 6 weeks later. Marcus ran the day-to-day, David funded it and built the partnerships. Michael Okafor and Rosa Gutierrez served on the oversight committee alongside civil rights advocates and aviation industry leaders. Sheila Rodriguez, the young flight attendant who had spoken up on the plane, was promoted to a training leadership role within the airline, overseeing the new de-escalation and bias curriculum. She called David the day she got the promotion. "Mr. Cole, I don't know how to thank you. You thanked me on that plane, Sheila, when you stood up and told the truth. Everything after that is because you were brave first." The airline survived, changed, reformed, restructured from the inside out, but it survived. Adler stayed in his reduced role. He never once stepped out of line. Some people said he was afraid of David. Others said the shame had genuinely changed him. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's how change works sometimes. Fear and shame braided together until they become something that looks like integrity. Henderson disappeared from public life. Clark took a position at a smaller company and never spoke about the incident again. Greg Sullivan was terminated and faced a civil suit from Michael Okafor and Rosa Gutierrez. The case settled out of court for an amount that was never disclosed. Linda Parker never returned to aviation. She moved to a small town outside Savannah and began volunteering at a community center that served underprivileged children. She never did another interview. She never made another public statement. Whether her remorse was genuine, whether the sickness Gloria named was truly being healed, nobody could say for certain. But she showed up at that community center every single day, and the children there never knew her name had once been a headline. On a warm afternoon in late spring, 3 months after the flight, Ethan Cole went back to school. He walked through the front doors with his backpack on and the metal pilot wings pinned to his shirt. Some kids stared, a few whispered. One boy pointed and said, "That's the kid from the video." Ethan stopped. He turned and looked at the boy, not angry, not afraid, steady, the way Marcus stood when he walked up the aisle, the way his father stood when he walked into the boardroom. "Yeah," Ethan said, "I am." Then he walked to his desk, sat down, pulled out his drawing pad and started sketching a new airplane. This one had 3 levels. Because if buildings could have 100 floors, why couldn't planes have 3? His teacher walked over and looked at the drawing. "Ethan, that's incredible. Does it have a name?" Ethan looked up. He smiled that smile, the real one, the sunrise one, the Coal Flyer 2. On David's desk in Chicago, next to the quarterly reports and the holding company filings and the stack of documents that governed a billion-dollar empire, there were 2 things that never moved. The framed photograph of Ethan at the air show, 3 years old, mouth wide open, pointing at the sky. And a child's drawing of an airplane, big wings, red tail. 3 stick figures standing beside it, 1 large, 1 medium, 1 small, standing together. Underneath, in the careful block letters of an 8-year-old boy, 3 names, Marcus and Dad and Ethan. And below the names, 1 word, home. At 30,000 feet, a child had been told he didn't belong. On the ground, a father reshaped an industry. A stranger became family. A grandmother held the line, and a boy who loved airplanes learned something no boarding pass could ever teach him. That belonging isn't something someone gives you, it's something you carry inside. And no one, not a flight attendant, not a boardroom, not a world full of people who look at you and decide who you are before you speak, no one can take it